and I just walked in and she's laying on the bathroom floor.
Apparently last night she passed away.
Today I want to tell you about a case that, in my opinion, was just so completely unnecessary. And I know that sounds strange because murder is always unnecessary, but with this case I really have that feeling of if people had just talked to each other, if they had been honest, if they had not hidden messages, changed names in phones, avoided conversations, played weird emotional games, maybe none of this would have happened. This is the case of Moriah Wilson, a young woman who came to Austin, Texas for a bike race. She was incredibly talented, she has this huge future in front of her, and she was right at the moment where her dream was starting to become real. And then somehow around her there was jealousy, betrayal, secret messages, a fake name saved in a phone, a black jeep near a crime scene, a gun, a door lock that recorded times, a bike thrown into bushes, a flight to Costa Rica, another person's passport, plastic surgery, fake names, and eventually a trial where the big question was basically, can a whole chain of small details prove what happened even if nobody saw the actual shooting? And that is what makes this case so disturbing to me, because it did not start as some big complicated criminal plot. It started as relationship chaos, as dishonesty, as jealousy, as people not saying what they really meant or not admitting what they were really doing. And in the middle of all of that was Moriah, or Mo as people close to her called her. And I really do not want her to become just the other woman in this story, because she was not that. She was not a side character in someone else's toxic relationship. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, an athlete, a woman with plans, dreams, and a future she had worked so hard for. So today we are going through the whole story: who Moriah Wilson was, who Colin Strickland was, who Kaitlin Armstrong was, how their lives got connected, what happened on May 11th, 2022, why one electronic door lock mattered so much, why police cared about a black jeep, how Kaitlin walked out of a police interview even though she was already suspicious, how she disappeared to Costa Rica, how she was finally found, and why the jury decided the way they did. And I will say this right away: this case is not only about who loved who, or who wanted who, or who was jealous of who. It is about what can happen when insecurity turns into control, control turns into obsession, and obsession turns into something that can never be undone. So, okay, let's get into the story. It is the night of May 11th, 2022, almost 10 p.m. Kaitlin Cash is coming home to her place in Austin, Texas. And before she even gets fully inside, she notices something strange. The front door is unlocked. Now, maybe this sounds small, people forget to lock doors all the time, but in this case, that door matters a lot, because Kaitlin's home did not just have a normal lock, it had an electronic lock, a keypad. So instead of only using a key, you could type in a code, and Moriah had her own code. That means the lock could show when Moriah used it. It could show when she left and when she came back. So later, this simple door lock became a very important piece of evidence. That night, the system showed that Moriah left the house earlier in the evening. And it showed that she came back at 8:36 p.m. So Kaitlin knows Moriah came back. She knows Moriah got inside. But now, almost 2 hours later, Kaitlin is standing there and the door is unlocked. And that feels wrong, so Kaitlin walks in and she finds Moriah on the bathroom floor. There is blood on her face, around her head, on the floor, and Kaitlin does what anyone would do in that moment. She called 911. She tells the dispatcher that her friend is on the floor. She says she does not know what happened. She cannot tell if Moriah is breathing. And then the dispatcher tells her what to do, so Kaitlin starts CPR.
And I just walked in and she's laying on the bathroom floor and there's blood everywhere.
There might be a police officer coming in soon. That's okay. Don't leave her alone and don't stop. Don't stop CPR unless that officer takes over for you, okay? Keep the line open for me when they come.
Just think about it for a second. She had let her friend stay with her because Moriah was in Austin for a bike race. That was all this was supposed to be, a visit and race weekend, a normal trip. And now Kaitlin is on the bathroom floor trying to save her friend's life. The paramedics and police come fast, but it is too late. At 10:10 p.m. Moriah Wilson is declared dead. And right away, this does not look like an accident. It doesn't feel random. Something terrible happened inside that home. But at the very beginning, the first big question was not only who killed Moriah. The first question was also who even knew she was there. When police looked at the scene, it became clear very fast that this was not a normal break-in. Moriah had several gunshot wounds. There were 3 shell casings near her body, but the gun was not there. Whoever did this did not leave the weapon behind. At the home itself was strange too. There was no clear signs that someone had forced their way in. The door was not kicked open, a window was not smashed. The apartment was not torn apart. It did not look like someone had gone through drawers looking for money or jewelry. It did not look like a normal robbery. Nothing about it really made sense that way. Another strange thing was the sound. Some neighbors said they did not hear gunshots, but one nearby camera did catch audio. Around 9:15 p.m. it recorded a sharp female scream. Then, right after that, 3 gunshots. So even if people nearby did not notice it in the moment, the camera picked up something very important. Then police noticed one missing item. Moriah's bike was gone. And this was not just any bike. It was her specialized racing bike. Kaitlin Cash said the bike was usually kept inside a bike bag near the door. But when police looked, the bag was still inside the apartment and the bike was missing. So police searched outside, and soon they found it. The bike had not been taken far away. It had not been sold. It was found nearby, thrown or hidden in thick bushes close to the home. And that was weird, because if this was a robbery, why would someone take an expensive racing bike and then just dump it nearby? That does not really make sense. So one idea was that maybe the bike was moved to make the scene look like robbery. Maybe the killer wanted police to think someone came in to steal the bike and then things went wrong. Another possible idea is more emotional, but I want to be clear, this is only an interpretation. It is not a confirmed fact. Moriah's bike was a huge part of her life. Cycling was her world, and cycling was also how she was connected to Colin Strickland. So some people look at the bike being thrown away and wonder if it was not only about confusing police. Maybe it meant something to the person who moved it. Maybe it was anger, jealousy. Maybe it was a way to damage something that represented Moriah. But again, that part is only a theory. What police knew for sure was this. Moriah was shot. The gun was gone, the home did not look robbed, there was no forced entry, and her expensive bike was found dumped nearby. And then Kaitlin Cash told police the name of the man Moriah had been with that evening. Colin Strickland, and the name opened the whole case in a completely different direction. Before we go deeper into Colin, I want to stop for a minute and talk about Moriah. Because in cases like this, it is very easy for a victim to become just the woman who was killed, and that is not fair. Moriah had a whole life before this case. Her name was Anna Moriah Wilson, but most people called her Mo. She was born on May 18, 1996 in Littleton, New Hampshire. She grew up in Kirby, Vermont with her parents Eric and Karen Wilson and her brother Matthew. Mo came from a very sporty family. Her father had a connection to the US ski team, and her aunt Laura Wilson competed in the Olympics in Nordic skiing. So sport was not just a hobby in her family. It was a big part of life. Mo also grew up near Kingdom Trails, which is a well-known place for mountain biking and skiing. So she was surrounded by trails, snow, bikes and outdoor sports from a very young age. This wasn't something she randomly got into later, she grew up in it. She went to Bergtown School, then Riverside School, and later Berg Mountain Academy. Berg Mountain Academy is a school for serious young ski racers. She graduated from there in 2014. And she was not just pretty good at skiing, she was very talented. In 2013, she placed third at the US Junior National Championships in downhill skiing. That is a huge deal. That tells you she had discipline, focus, and a lot of drive from a young age. After that, she went to Dartmouth College. She studied engineering and graduated in 2019. She was also part of the Dartmouth Alpine ski team, which was actually a childhood dream for her. So imagine that. She worked for years, trained for years, and then she actually reached the place she had dreamed about. But then her body started to make things hard. Mo had repeated ACL injuries, and for a skier, knee injuries are a nightmare. After those injuries, her ski career could not continue the same way. But Mo did not just stop being an athlete. She found another way. Cycling first came into her life as part of rehab. It was a way to keep her body strong without the same damage to her knees. But slowly, it became much more than rehab. It became her new sport. And honestly, that says a lot about her. She lost one dream, or at least had to leave one path, and instead of giving up, she built another one. After college, Mo moved to the San Francisco Bay Area and started working for Specialized, a major bike company. Her job was demand planner, so she worked behind the scenes in the cycling world while also building her own racing career. She got into gravel cycling and mountain biking. And if you do not know what gravel cycling is, it is basically long races on gravel roads, dirt roads, and rough paths. It is like a mix of road cycling and mountain biking. It is hard, long, dusty, and honestly, it sounds painful to me. But Mo was amazing at it, and she rose really fast. In just a couple of seasons, she became one of the most exciting women in American off-road cycling. She won Shasta Gravel Hugger, she won Rock Cobbler, she won Belgian Waffle Ride California by about 25 minutes, which is not a small win. That is a huge gap. People in the cycling world were starting to see her as one of the strongest riders out there. She was not just doing well, she was becoming a star. But what I really want you to understand is that Mo was not only about race results. She wanted to inspire people to move, to ride, to be active, and to feel good in their bodies. She cared about women in sport, she cared about community, she had talked about going back to Vermont one day and creating a space for cyclists, maybe a cafe, maybe some kind of meeting place where people could come together, talk, ride, and feel welcome. She also had these everyday things she loved. She liked traveling, riding, and cooking. She loved Italian food, Mexican food, Taco Tuesday, and maple ice cream, which is such a Vermont detail. She also liked board games, and I don't know, I think those little things matter because she wasn't just an athlete, and she wasn't just a victim. Mo was 25 years old. She had already worked through injuries, changed sports, built a new career, and started winning in a huge way. And right at the moment when she decided to leave Specialized and become a full-time professional cyclist, she flew to Austin for a race she would never get to ride. Moriah arrived in Austin, Texas on May 10th, 2022. She flew in from San Francisco because she was there for a bike race called Gravel Locos. That race was supposed to happen on May 14th in Hico, Texas. So she had a few days before the race, and while she was in Austin, she was staying with her friend Kaitlin Cash. Kaitlin picked her up from the airport and brought her back to her place. The next day was May 11th. That was the day everything changed. But at the start of the day, it still looked normal. Moriah had plans to meet Colin Strickland. They were going to go swimming. and Colin was also part of the cycling world, so on the surface this did not look strange. Two cyclists hanging out before a race weekend. That could be totally normal. Moriah told Kaitlin Cash about the plan. Kaitlin was nearby, so she came back to the house for a little bit and they talked about the details in person. And before Moriah left, Kaitlin gave her a door code. This is where that electronic lock comes back. Kaitlin's door had a keypad lock, so instead of only using a key, you could type in a code, and Moriah had her own code just for her. That means when she used it, the system saved the time. It showed when the door was locked or unlocked with that code. And I know a door code sounds like the most boring detail in the world, but in this case it becomes so important. Because later, when police are trying to build a timeline, that log gives them two very clear moments. At 5:55 p.m., Moriah uses her code and leaves the house. So we know she was alive. We know she left and went out that evening. Then, at 8:36 p.m., the code is used again. That means Moriah came back. She got inside the house. She made it back from being out with Colin. And that is such an important point because the crime did not happen while she was out. It happened after she came back, after she was already inside. So the law can tell police, Moriah left at 5:55 and came back at 8:36. But it cannot tell them what happened after that. It cannot tell them if she locked the door from inside, if someone came to the door, if she opened it for someone, if someone left without using the keypad. And that is why later, when Kaitlin Cash comes home and the door is unlocked, it feels so strange, because we know Moriah got back at 8:36. We know she was inside, but by the time Kaitlin comes home before 10 p.m., something has happened and the door is not locked anymore. That evening on paper still sounds so simple. Moriah goes out, she meets Colin, they go swimming, they get food, he brings her back, she uses the code and goes inside. Nothing about it sounds like the beginning of a murder case. The man Moriah went out with that evening, Colin Strickland, was not just any friend from the cycling world. He had history with Moriah, and he also had a girlfriend. Her name was Kaitlin Armstrong. And Kaitlin knew exactly who Moriah was. And that is why we have to talk about Colin now. Because once his name comes into the story, the case stops being just Moriah went out with a friend before she died. It becomes much more complicated than that. His full name is Colin Arturo Strickland. He was born on November 7th, 1986 in Johnson City, Texas. He grew up on a family farm, so he had that kind of outdoorsy, physical countryside background from the beginning. Later, before cycling became his main thing, he worked as an environmental consultant, so his life was already connected to being outside, to land, nature, to field work, that kind of world. And then cycling slowly became a bigger and bigger part of his life. From what is known, he started racing more seriously around 2010. And over time he became especially strong in gravel cycling, which is the same world Moriah was rising in. And Colin was not just some random local rider, he was a big name in that scene. He won Gravel Worlds in 2017 and again in 2018. Then in 2019 he won Unbound Gravel 200, which is one of the biggest and hardest gravel races in the United States. That win already put him at the top of the sport. He had major sponsors too, including names like Red Bull, Rafa, Envy and Specialized. So in the gravel world people knew who he was. When Moriah met him, she was this fast rising new star. She was winning, people were starting to talk about her, and she was clearly going somewhere. Colin, on the other hand, was already established. He had the wins, the sponsors, the name, the connections. So they were in the same sport, but at slightly different points in their careers. They met in 2021 at a cycling event. And from the outside, that makes total sense. Cycling is a small world. People meet at races, they ride together, they train together, follow each other online, hear about each other's results. So Moriah and Colin, knowing each other was not strange by itself. But their connection was not just a random cycling friendship either. They had history. And that is what made Colin such a key person in the case. He was the last person Moriah had gone out with that evening. He was part of the same cycling world as her. He had been romantically involved with her before. And at the same time, he had another woman in his life. Because Colin was not a single man who simply met a talented young cyclist and spent the evening with her. He had a girlfriend, Kaitlin Armstrong, and this is where we need to talk about her. Her full name is Kaitlin Marie Armstrong. She was born on November 21st, 1987. She grew up in Livonia, Michigan, which is a suburb near Detroit. She had a sister named Christine. Her parents divorced when she and her sister were still young. Her father reportedly left the family, and her mother later struggled with alcohol. One childhood friend also claimed that Kaitlin had been sexually abused in the past. But the public details around that are not clear, so I do not want to treat it like a fully documented part of the case. I mention it only as background because it gives a little more context about her life before Colin. But it does not explain what happened to Moriah, and it definitely does not excuse it. A painful childhood can help us understand someone's history, but it did not make them less responsible for their choices. Kaitlin went to Stevenson High School, and from what is known, she was athletic too. She played volleyball, did track, and also played some basketball. So just like Colin and Moriah, she had that sporty side. Later, she studied at Schoolcraft College and Eastern Michigan University. She also got a real estate license, but the thing people seemed to connect her with the most was yoga. In 2018, she went to Bali for intensive yoga teacher training, and people who met her around the time described her as more quiet, more closed off, maybe a little sensitive, not really the loud person in the room. So when you first hear about Kaitlin, she does not sound like this dramatic, obvious villain type. She sounds like someone who was private, athletic, into yoga, into wellness, into that kind of calmer lifestyle. And I think that's one of the reasons this case feels so unsettling. From the outside, she did not look like someone who would end up in a murder case. Kaitlin met Colin in 2019 through a dating app, and after they got together, Colin brought her more into the cycling world. He took her on rides, introduced her to people, and cycling became part of their relationship too. But their relationship was not very stable. They broke up and got back together more than once. It was one of those on and off relationships where from the outside people may not even know if they are together or not, because the answer changes depending on the week. Then, during the big winter storms in Texas, Kaitlin's home was damaged. Because of that, she moved in with Colin. And according to Colin, he was not exactly excited about it, but he also did not want to leave her without a place to stay. So they were living together, but the relationship was still complicated. They also started building a life that was not just romantic. They worked together, they had a business renovating trailers, they bought a house in Lockhart, they formed an LLC, so now they were not only boyfriend and girlfriend. Their money, their home, work plans, everything was tied together. And Kaitlin also had access to a lot of Colin's digital life. Finances, emails, passwords, his accounts. And that sounds for someone like a normal couple thing at first, especially if you live together and run a business together. But later in this case, the detail becomes huge. Because if Kaitlin had access to Colin's emails and accounts, then she may have been able to see things he was not telling her directly. Messages, reservations, plans, contacts, maybe even information about Moriah. And that access to Colin's digital life became one of the most important details in the whole case. So now we have Colin, we have Kaitlin, and we have this relationship that already sounds kind of complicated. They were together, then not together, then together again. They lived together, worked together, shared money, shared plans, and then in 2021 Moriah comes into the picture. Colin and Moriah met through cycling, and in October 2021 Colin and Kaitlin were at the race weekend in Bentonville, Arkansas. After one of the events, Colin went on a mountain bike ride with a group of other riders. Moriah was one of them. And from the outside, that could sound very normal. It was a cycling event. Cyclists go riding together, that is kind of the whole point. But Kaitlin was upset that Colin went on that ride with other women and did not take her with him. And apparently that became a big fight on the drive back to Austin. By the time they came home, Colin and Kaitlin had broken up. And then, only a few days later, Colin saw Moriah again in Austin. They went on a date. After that, they went to Marfa, Texas for a 3-day training trip. And yes, according to Colin, the trip was romantic. But he later said it was not serious and that the romantic part of his relationship with Moriah ended by early November 2021. That detail is important because Moriah was later often described in the media like she was actively involved with Colin at the time of her death. But her family pushed back on that. They said that as far as they knew from Moriah, she was not in a romantic relationship with anyone when she died. So I want to be fair here. According to Colin, the romantic part with Moriah was short. According to Moriah's family, she was not his girlfriend in May 2022. But there was still history there. There had been a romantic connection. There was still contact, and there was still clearly emotional confusion around it. And that is where things get messy, because maybe for Colin it was something brief that happened during a breakup, maybe for Moriah there were still questions, and for Kaitlin it seems like Moriah did not just disappear from the story where Colin said it was over. According to Colin, it was short and it ended months before the murder, but for Kaitlin it clearly did not feel over at all. And this is where it stops feeling like, okay, they dated for a minute and moved on, because nobody really moved on. At some point after Colin and Moriah started seeing each other, Kaitlin allegedly contacted Moriah herself. She reportedly told Moriah that she was Colin's partner. And the weird part is, at that time Colin and Kaitlin were apparently broken up. So from Moriah's side, this must have been confusing, because if Colin is single, or at least saying he is single, and then another woman calls you and says, actually, I'm his girlfriend, what are you even supposed to do with that? There were also text messages from October 2021 that showed Kaitlin was already upset about Colin and Moriah. One place that comes up is the Meteor, which was a cafe in Austin that people in the cycling community often went to. Kaitlin texted Colin about him going there with Moriah, and Colin basically answered like, can you please act like an adult? Then later he asked her if she had called Moriah Wilson, like he was trying to understand what she had done and why. So already a month before the murder, Moriah was not just some random name to Kaitlin. She was someone Kaitlin was watching, asking about, reacting to. Then in December 2021, Colin and Kaitlin got back together, but Colin did not fully stop talking to Moriah. And that is where it gets even messier, because Moriah's messages to Colin sometimes did not seem to go through. Later, during the investigation, Colin found out that Moriah's contact had been blocked in his phone. Colin said he did not block her. So the obvious suspicion is that Kaitlin may have done it because she had access to his phone and accounts. But I want to be clear, this is a suspicion based on the situation. I cannot say it as a proven fact. What we do know is that Moriah was blocked, and Colin said he was not the one who blocked her. And then Colin did something that tells you a lot about the mood in that relationship. He saved Moriah's contact under a fake name, Christine Wall. He also deleted their messages. And his reason was basically that he did not want to upset Kaitlin. And listen, I understand avoiding a fight, I really do. But saving someone under a fake name in your phone is not normal. We are just friends and everything is calm behavior. That means Colin knew Kaitlin had a strong reaction to Moriah. It also means Moriah was being hidden, which probably made everything even more unhealthy. In January 2022, Moriah messaged Colin and said she was confused. She said she had tried to text him before, but it looked like her messages were not going through again. She wanted to talk and understand what was happening. She basically said that if he only wanted to be friends, that was okay, but she wanted clarity because she did not know what to think. And Colin answered in an apologetic way. He told her he felt really bad that he had put her in a situation where she did not feel good. So even from those messages, it sounds like they was not fully clear or clean. Moriah was trying to understand where she stood. Colin was trying to keep peace. Kaitlin was already upset. It was just messy from every side. Then, in March 2022, about 2 months before the murder, Colin was going to race in Oklahoma, and Moriah was also at that event. Kaitlin texted Colin something like, "Say hi to Moriah Wilson," in this passive-aggressive way. You know, those messages that look harmless if you read them out loud, but you can absolutely feel the attitude behind them. Colin answered, "Can you please stop?" So by March, this was still coming up. Moriah was still a trigger point in their relationship. Colin was still trying to shut down the conversation instead of really dealing with it. And Kaitlin was clearly not over the fact that Moriah existed in Colin's world. And then 2 women came forward and told police that Kaitlin had not talked about Moriah in a jealous way. According to them, she had talked about killing her. And that brings us to the part that made the jealousy look a lot more serious. Because after Moriah was killed, 2 women came forward and told police that Kaitlin had said things about Moriah before, and not just normal jealous comments. According to them, she had talked about killing her. One of those women was Jacqueline Chastain. She contacted police on May 14th, just a few days after the murder. Jacqueline said she had been with Kaitlin when Kaitlin learned more about Colin and Moriah. According to Jacqueline, Kaitlin was extremely upset. She was shaking, and she allegedly said she was so angry that she could kill Moriah. Jacqueline also remembered some kind of comment about a gun, but she was not fully sure about the exact words. The main point is that Jacqueline remembered Kaitlin being very angry and saying something violent about Moriah. The other woman was Nicole Mertz. She talked about a moment from fall 2021 when Kaitlin was upset about Colin and Moriah. Kaitlin apparently knew Colin had taken Moriah to a restaurant because she had seen an email confirmation from his account. And again, that matters because it shows she was looking at his email and keeping track of what he was doing. Nicole said that when she asked Kaitlin what she would do if Colin started seriously dating someone else, Kaitlin answered, "I would kill her." Now, to be fair, people do say awful things when they are angry. I do not want to pretend every angry sentence is a murder plan. Sometimes people say, "I could kill him," and they do not mean it literally. They mean they are mad, they are being dramatic. It is ugly, but it happens. But the problem is Moriah was later actually killed. So after the murder, those comments did not sound like random angry words anymore and become part of the motive. They showed that Kaitlin was not just a little uncomfortable with Moriah. According to these witnesses, she had been angry enough to talk about violence. And at that point, police were no longer looking only at a jealous girlfriend. They had a jealous girlfriend, her car near the crime scene, a gun connected to her inside the house, and 2 witnesses saying she had talked about killing Moriah. So now that we know the background, the jealousy, the hidden messages, the fake name in Colin's phone, and the things Kaitlin had allegedly said before, we can go back to the actual day Moriah was killed. And this is the part where the timeline gets very important, because this case is not built on one big moment that one person saw. It is built from small pieces. A text here, a door code there, a phone going offline, a jeep moving, a camera catching sound. On the morning on May 11th, 2022, Moriah and Colin were texting. They were making plans to meet up that day. Moriah was staying at Kaitlin's cash place in Austin, so at some point she sent Colin that address. That matters later because police would look very closely at who could have known where she was staying. Later that day, Kaitlin Cash knew Moriah was going out with Colin. The plan was to go swimming. Kaitlin was nearby, so she stepped by the house and talked with Moriah in person. Before Moriah left, Kaitlin gave her that special door code for the electronic lock. So Moriah had her own code, and every time she used it, the system saved the time. At 5:55 p.m., Moriah left the house. The lock recorded it, so we know she left alive. Around the time, Colin picked her up on his motorcycle or scooter and they went to Deep Eddy Pool in Austin. They swam there and after that they went to Pool Burger. And while Moriah and Colin were together, Kaitlin tried to reach Colin. At 6:24 p.m., Kaitlin called him. Colin did not answer. She also sent him a message. And according to the later timeline, no long after that, Kaitlin's Jeep started moving. Then there is the phone detail. Around 7:30 p.m., Kaitlin's main phone went offline or was turned off. It stayed offline until 9:47 p.m. Now, to be fair, a phone being offline does not prove anything by itself. A phone can die, can be turned off, a phone can have issues. But in this case, the timing is what makes it suspicious, because that phone was offline during the exact window when Moriah came home and was killed. At 8 p.m., Moriah and Colin left Pool Burger. Colin took her back to Kaitlin Cash's place. At 8:36 p.m., Moriah used her door code and unlocked the door. So again, we know she came back. She made it inside. The crime happened after that. Colin then left, and after dropping Moriah off, he sent Kaitlin a message that was not true. He did not tell her he had been with Moriah. He made it sound like he had been doing something else. Maybe he lied because he did not want a fight. Maybe he lied because he knew Kaitlin would be angry, but either way, he hid it. At about 8:40 p.m., data connected to Kaitlin's Jeep placed the vehicle near the alley by Kaitlin's Cash's home. And again, the defense later made the point that Jeep data shows the Jeep, not the driver. That is true, but the Jeep being there at the time becomes very hard to ignore when you put it next to everything else. At 9:13 p.m., Moriah sent her last known message. It was to Christopher Strickland, who was not related to Colin Strickland, same last name, different person. And that is an important detail because it shows Moriah was still alive and using her phone at 9:13. Then around 9:15 p.m. a neighbor's camera caught the sound. A sharp female scream, then 3 gunshots. That is only about 2 minutes after Moriah's last known text. At 9:17 p.m. the Jeep connected to Kaitlin left the area. At 9:21 p.m., Colin texted Kaitlin again, and shortly after that, Kaitlin arrived home in her Jeep. Then, at 9:47 p.m., Kaitlin's phone came back online. A few minutes later, around 9:54 to 9:56 p.m., Kaitlin Cash came home. She saw the door was unlocked. She walked inside. She found Moriah on the bathroom floor and called 911.
And I just walked in and she's laying on the bathroom floor and there's blood everywhere.
There might be a police officer coming in soon. That's okay. Don't leave her alone and don't stop. Don't stop CPR unless that officer takes over for you, okay? Keep the line open for me when they come.
She tried to do CPR, but it was too late. At 10:10 p.m., Moriah was declared dead. And That is why this timeline is so scary. It is very tight. Moriah is still on her phone at 9:13. Around 9:15 the camera catches the scream and the shots. At 9:17 the jeep leaves the area, and less than an hour later Kaitlin Cash walks into a nightmare. The next day, May 12th, police went to Colin Strickland's home.
Do you know Anna? Mo. She's a
yes.
gravel rider.
Yes, I do.
Because you know he's going to say this, so apparently last night she passed away.
Oh, dude.
Yeah. Right now it's an open investigation, but it is being investigated as a homicide.
And this is where the case starts moving toward Kaitlin very quickly. Because when officers arrived, they saw a black Jeep Grand Cherokee parked outside. And that caught their attention right away because a black SUV, a Jeep, had been seen on camera near Kaitlin Cash's home around the time Moriah was killed. At first, police were there to talk to Colin because he was the last known person who had been with Moriah that evening. They told him that Moriah was dead, and from what we know, he looked shocked. He confirmed that yes, he had been with her the night before. He said he picked her up, they went swimming at Deep Eddy Pool, then they went to eat at Pool Burger, and after that he dropped her back off at Kaitlin Cash's place. Colin told police that when he dropped Moriah off, he did not see anyone strange around the house. He said he left after that and went home. He agreed to go to the police station for a more formal interview.
I certainly think that she would do anything, but I mean, has she ever threatened anything, or she's always seemed like such a like gentle person? She's like it doesn't make sense.
Knowing Caitlin's vehicle affair, what do you think took place?
I know both these people, I think it's just so far beyond the realm of reality that I live in, or thought. So that's what I'm struggling.
I'm asking you what you think. Is she capable of doing something?
I wouldn't be living that person who I think is capable of doing this. So the answer is no. I don't believe it.
And during that interview, the police started asking for more detail about the night. And this is where Colin had to admit something uncomfortable. He had lied to Kaitlin about where he was. After dropping Moriah off, he sent Kaitlin a message that made it sound like he had been doing something else. He did not tell her he had been with Moriah. And again, maybe he did that because he wanted to avoid a fight. But to police, it showed that Moriah was already a sensitive topic in that relationship. Colin said he got home around 8:43 p.m. He also told police that Kaitlin came home later in her Jeep. And the detail mattered because police were now looking at the black Jeep outside his house and comparing it to the vehicle seen near the crime scene. Then police learned that the Jeep did not belong to Colin. It belonged to Kaitlin Armstrong. And while they were looking into Colin and Kaitlin, another big detail came up. Colin had guns in the home. He told police he had bought 2 handguns, one for himself and one for Kaitlin. The one connected to Kaitlin was a Big Sauer P365 9mm. The one connected to Colin was a Springfield Armory, also 9mm. Colin said he bought Kaitlin a gun because she had been worried about safety, things like road rage or being alone in remote areas while cycling. He also said they had gone to the shooting range together, so Kaitlin knew how to use it. And at this point, police had a lot of pieces starting to line up. Moriah had been with Colin. Colin had a girlfriend who already had tension around Moriah. That girlfriend owned a black Jeep like the one seen near the crime scene. and that girlfriend also had a 9mm handgun. And very soon, the gun Colin bought for Kaitlin was going to become one of the biggest problems in the whole case. So now police wanted to talk to Kaitlin Armstrong. And the way they got her to the station was actually because of an old warrant from 2018. It was not about Moriah, but it was a separate case, a theft of service case. The story was that Kaitlin had allegedly gotten a cosmetic procedure, some kind of fillers worth around $600 to $700, and after the procedure, she supposedly said she needed to go to her car to get a different car to pay. But then she did not come back, so that whole case turned into a warrant. Because of that, police were able to bring Kaitlin in, but there was a problem, a big one. The warrant had the wrong date of birth, so legally they could not keep her there under that warrant. They had to tell her she was not under arrest, she was free to leave. And this is one of those moments in the case where you almost want to pause and go, wait, what? Because police had Kaitlin in the room. They already knew her Jeep looked like the one near the crime scene. They already knew Colin had mentioned problems between her and Moriah, but because the warrant had that mistake, they could not just hold her. Detective Katie Connor still tried to talk to her. She used a friendly tone, she tried to make it feel more like a conversation than an interrogation. She told Kaitlin that Colin had brought up her name and that police wanted to understand her side of the story. She asked about Moriah, she asked about detention, and then she brought up the Jeep. She basically told Kaitlin that her vehicle had been seen near the place where Moriah was killed, and that it did not look good, especially with what Colin had said about jealousy and problems between them. But Kaitlin did not give a clear explanation. She did not say, oh, I was there because of this. She did not say, someone else had my car. She did not really explain why her Jeep would be near her house. She answered very shortly. She said some things were not accurate. She asked if she should have a lawyer. And again she said she wanted to leave. And since she was not legally under arrest, police had to let her go. That moment feels almost unbelievable later, because the woman who would become the main suspect was sitting right there in the police station. She heard that her car had been seen near the crime scene. She walked out. And within days, she would be gone. Not just out of Austin, out of the country.
And I'm sorry, if I have an existing warrant and you don't know what it's about, do I need an attorney here?
Did you hear about what's happened over the past 24 hours?
Colin walked in the house and said one of the women in the cycling community passed away.
Yes. It sounds like there was some issues between you and this girl.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly what you mean or what information you like.
So it sounds like maybe he went out with this girl the other day, and maybe it sounds like from what he's saying that you were a little upset about it. We're hearing like, yeah, there was some jealousy stuff going on. Like, that doesn't sound very good.
I would like to leave. I don't actually know, and I would like to leave.
Your vehicle was seen next to her house when he's saying this stuff, and then your vehicle is seen. Like, I want to be able to explain, okay, there's a logical explanation for this. Maybe you were upset and you were just in the area or something. Like, I don't know, because I don't have your story. When I can't explain that and all I see is that your vehicle's over there, that kind of makes it look not too good, right? When we're talking to Colin and we're hearing like, yeah, there was some jealousy stuff going on, like, that doesn't sound very good.
I would like to leave if I'm free to leave.
Okay.
After Kaitlin left the police station, investigators kept working. And one of the biggest things they had to check was the gun. During the search of the home Colin and Kaitlin shared, police found the two handguns Colin had told them about. One was the 6-hour P365 9mm connected to Kaitlin. The other was Colin's Springfield Armory, also 9mm. Police already had shell casings from the crime scene, 3 of them. So the next step was obvious. They had to compare those casings to the guns from the house. And according to the ballistic testing, the gun connected to Kaitlin matched the shooting. Colin's gun was not the match. That was a huge moment in the case, because now police did not just have a jealous girlfriend and a black jeep near the house, witnesses saying Kaitlin had talked about killing Moriah. They had a gun connected to Kaitlin that, according to the analysis, matched the evidence from the scene. And then there were all the other pieces around it. The jeep near Kaitlin Kay's home around the time Moriah was killed, the history between Colin, Moriah and Kaitlin, the jealousy, the alleged threats, Kaitlin not giving a clear reason why her car would have been there. And then, very soon after the police interview, the sale of that same jeep. So by May 17th, investigators had enough to move forward. A murder warrant was issued for Kaitlin Armstrong. But when police went to find her, she was gone. Kaitlin Armstrong was no longer where she was supposed to be. And this is where the case turns into a manhunt. Because by the time the murder warrant was issued, Kaitlin was already moving. She wasn't just hiding at someone's house for a few days or ignoring calls. By this point, her choices were starting to look very deliberate. Like she was trying to get as far away from Austin and from the case as possible. On May 13th, just one day after she was questioned by police, Kaitlin sold her black Jeep Grand Cherokee to CarMax. She got $12,200 for it. This was the Jeep police were looking at because a black Jeep had been seen near Kaitlin Kay's home around the time Moriah was killed. So selling it that quickly looked very suspicious. Maybe someone could argue she needed money or she was already planning to sell it. Fine, that is possible in theory, but the timing is hard to ignore. She talks to police, hears that her Jeep was seen near the crime scene, and the next day the Jeep is sold. Then, on May 14th, Kaitlin flew from Austin to New York. She went to see her sister, Christine. At this point, police were still building the case, but Kaitlin was already out of Texas. A few days later, on May 18th, Christine drove Kaitlin to the airport in Newark. The plan, at least what Christine understood, was that Kaitlin was going to fly back to Austin. But after Christine dropped her off, Kaitlin called her and said she had changed her mind. She said she was going to drive back instead. And that sounds strange right away, because Newark to Austin is a very long drive, around 25 to 30 hours. So if someone suddenly says, actually I'm not flying, I will just drive, that raises questions. Like, with what car? Why? Where are you going? What is actually happening? Then Christine realized something else. Her passport was missing, and that changed everything. Investigators checked flight records under Christine Armstrong's name, and they found a one-way flight from Newark to San Jose, Costa Rica on May 18th. According to authorities, Kaitlin had used a passport that did not belong to her to leave the United States. It was Christine's passport. But Christine was not charged with helping her, so I want to be clear about it. The public information does not show that Christine helped Kaitlin escape. From what we know, her passport was used, but she was not accused of being part of the plan. So, while Texas was looking for Kaitlin, she was not in Texas. She was not even in New York anymore. She was in Costa Rica. And from there, she started to become someone else. So, now the search moves to Costa Rica. And Costa Rica was probably one of the hardest places to look for her, because Kaitlin did not hide in some tiny empty town where everybody would notice a new woman right away. She went to Santa Teresa area, which is full of tourists, beaches, hostels, yoga classes, surfers, backpackers, and people who are just passing through. And that matters because Kaitlin could blend in there. A sporty woman traveling alone doing yoga with beach clothes and backpack would not look strange. There was probably many women around her age with long hair, athletic bodies, and that whole travel look. So for investigators, this was not simple at all. They were not looking for one woman in a quiet place, but they were looking for one woman in a place where many women could look a little bit like her. The US Marshals got involved in the search. Agents Amir Perez and Damian Fernandez went to Costa Rica to help with the hunt. They checked hostels, they showed Kaitlin's photo to people, they asked around, they followed tips, they looked through camera footage, they talked to locals, business owners, and people who may have seen her. And slowly, they started hearing that she might be using different names. Some sources mentioned names like Beth, Ari Martin, and Liz Martin. The confirmed alias connected to the cosmetic procedure was Allison Page. She also presented herself as a yoga instructor, which made sense with her real background. She was not pretending to be something completely random. She was using something she actually knew, which probably helped her seem believable. She also changed her appearance. She cut and dyed her hair. At one point, people noticed she had a bandage on her nose. When someone asked what happened, she said she had been hit with a surfboard. And in a beach town, that sounds believable enough. People surf, people get hurt. Nobody immediately thinks, oh, maybe this is a woman wanted for a murder in Texas who had surgery to change her face. But according to the evidence later discussed, the bandage was not from a surf accident. Kaitlin had cosmetic work done. On June 22nd, under the name Allison Page, she reportedly had several procedures, including rhinoplasty, work on her lips, a brow lift, and microneedling. There was also a receipt or document for thousands of dollars connected to these procedures. So by this point, she was not only outside the United States, she was using other names, changing her hair, changing her face, and trying to live inside this yoga and tourist community in Costa Rica. And then the marshals tried something different. They posted a fake job ad for a yoga instructor, and Kaitlin answered. That part is also unbelievable because after all the flights, the passport, the fake names, the hostels, the surgery, what finally brings her close enough to catch is a yoga job ad. They arranged to meet at a hostel. One of the marshals approached her carefully. He did not want to scare her off. He got close enough to look at her face. And even though her appearance had changed, he recognized her by her eyes and the bandage on her nose. Then Costa Rican police moved in. On June 29, 2022, after 43 days on the run, Kaitlin Armstrong was arrested. And when authorities searched her storage area, they found 2 passports. One was hers, one was her sister Christine's. So that was the end of the Costa Rica escape. But it was not the end of her trying to run, because about a year later she would try again, this time while already in custody. After Kaitlin was arrested in Costa Rica, she was taken to immigration detention in San Jose. From there, the process started to send her back to the United States. On July 2nd, 2022, she was deported back to the US. After she arrived, she was handed over to the US Marshals and then taken back to Austin, Texas. She was placed in the Travis County Jail and her bond was set to $3.5 million. She did not pay it, so she stayed in custody while waiting for trial. And for a while that seemed like the end of the running part of the story. She had been found, she had been brought back, she was in jail. The case was moving toward trial. But then, in October 2023, shortly before the trial was supposed to start, there was another escape attempt. Depending on the source, this is listed as October 11th or October October 12th. Kaitlin was being taken to a medical appointment, and during the trip she managed to get away from custody. She slipped away from the officers and started running. And I know this sounds almost unreal because at this point she had already been caught after an international manhunt. She had already been brought back from Costa Rica. She was already facing a murder charge, and still she tried to run again. She ran for several minutes before she was caught. Some sources describe the distance as less than a mile, or roughly around a kilometer. Either way, she did not get far. Officers caught her and brought her back into custody. For the prosecution, this became part of a much bigger picture. They could point to more than one strange choice after Moriah's death. Kaitlin sold the Jeep. She flew to New York. She used a passport that did not belong to her. She went to Costa Rica. She used fake names. She changed her appearance, and then even after being arrested and brought back, she tried to escape again. So when the trial finally began, prosecutors did not have to talk only about jealousy. They could show a whole pattern: watching, planning, the shooting, running, and then trying to run again. The trial started in Austin, Texas in fall of 2023. Jury selection began on October 30th, and the main testimony started on November the 1st. The judge was Brenda Kennedy. And right away, both sides had very different stories for the jury. The prosecution said this was a murder driven by jealousy. Their argument was that Kaitlin knew exactly who Moriah was. She had been upset about her for months. She had looked at her online. She had access to Colin's accounts, email, passwords, and messages. She knew more than Colin may have realized. And on the night Moriah was killed, Kaitlin's Jeep was near the house, her phone was offline, the gun connected to her matched the shooting, her DNA was connected to Moriah's bike, and after all of that, she ran to Costa Rica. So the prosecution was basically saying, look at the whole picture. Do not look at one detail alone, look at all of it together. The defense had a very different point. They said there was no camera inside the apartment, nobody saw Kaitlin shoot Moriah, the case was circumstantial. The GPS data showed where the Jeep was, but it did not show who was driving. The DNA could have been transferred in another way, the ballistics evidence could be questioned. And they argued that investigators had tunnel vision, meaning they focused on Kaitlin too fast and then started fitting everything around her. They also tried to raise questions about Colin, not necessarily in a clean, simple way, but enough to make the jury think about whether there was another possible version of the story. And that is why this trial was so interesting, because everyone knew there was no video of the actual shooting. There was no witness who could walk into court and say, I saw Kaitlin pull the trigger. The whole question was whether all those smaller pieces, the Jeep, the phone, the gun, the bike, the online activity, the jealousy, the escape, were enough together. Because one piece alone might have left room for doubt. But what happens when every piece points in the same direction? So let's start with the digital evidence, because this case had a lot of it. And honestly, that is one of the strangest parts of modern true crime. Sometimes there is no person who sees what happened, but phones, cars, apps, door locks, search history, all of these little things are quietly keeping track. Kaitlin's main phone was offline from around 7:30 p.m. to 9:47 p.m. on the night Moriah was killed. And the time window matters a lot. Moriah came back to Kaitlin Cash's home at 8 8:36 p.m. The scream and gunshots were recorded around 9:15 p.m. and Kaitlin's phone was not online during that whole key period. Now again, a phone being offline does not prove murder by itself. A phone can die, someone can turn it off for a normal reason, but when you put that next to everything else, the timing looks bad. There was also another device that had been reset to factory settings, so most of the data was gone, but investigators were still able to recover some deleted files from another device, and one of the most important things they found was a deleted note. That note had an address in it. Not the exact normal address of Kaitlin K's place, but an address that led very close to where Moriah was staying. And the note was deleted the day after Moriah was killed. For the prosecution, that looked like someone trying to erase a trace. Like, why would this address be in Kaitlin's phone, and why would it be deleted right after the murder? Then there were the cache files. Sometimes when you look at pictures, profiles, or websites on your phone, the phone saves small pieces of the data for a while so things load faster later. So it can show that the phone displayed that content. And investigators found images of Moriah in Kaitlin's phone cache. So the point was not necessarily that Kaitlin saved Moriah's pictures like photos in her camera roll. The point was that Moriah's images had been viewed on that phone. That supported the idea that Kaitlin was looking at Moriah online. There was also Instagram and Strava. Strava is an app athletes use to track runs, rides, and workouts with GPS. For cyclists, it is very normal. You ride, the app records the route, the distance, the time, and sometimes people share that with friends or followers. But in this case, the kind of normal athlete sharing becomes creepy. Because if your activity is public, someone can learn where you ride, where you train, and sometimes even where you are. Moriah probably used Strava like an athlete, just normal training life, but prosecutors argued Kaitlin may have used it to follow or track her. And then there's Colin's digital life. Kaitlin had access to a lot of his accounts, his email, password, finances, and other information. We already know she had seen at least one restaurant reservation through his email. That means she could learn things from his accounts even if Colin was not telling her directly. So the prosecution's argument was not just Kaitlin was jealous, it was more like Kaitlin had ways to watch. She could look at Moriah online, she could see things through Colin's accounts, she may have seen plans, messages, addresses, or clues about where Moriah was. Another huge piece of evidence was the Jeep. On the night Moriah was killed, cameras near Kaitlin K's home caught a black SUV moving in the area. More specifically, it looked like a black Jeep Grand Cherokee with a bike rack on the back. The problem was, the license plate was not clear, so at first police could not just look at the footage and say, okay, this is definitely Kaitlin's car. But then they went to Colin's house the next day, and there it was, a black Jeep Grand Cherokee outside, and the Jeep belonged to Kaitlin Armstrong. Later, after Kaitlin sold the Jeep to CarMax, police tracked down the new owner and analyzed the vehicle system. The car's data showed that the Jeep was near Kaitlin K's home during a very important time window, roughly from about 8:40 p.m. to 9:17 p.m. And the timing is bad, because Moriah came back to the house at 8:36 p.m. The scream and gunshots were around 9:15 p.m. and then the Jeep left the area around 9:17 p.m. So, according to the prosecution, the Jeep was basically sitting near the house during the exact window when Moriah was killed. But here is the limit, and the defense focused on this a lot. Jeep data showed the car. It did not show the driver. The data could place the vehicle near the scene, but it could not take a photo of Kaitlin behind the wheel. So by itself the Jeep evidence did not prove everything. Still, in context, it was hard to ignore. Kaitlin owned the Jeep. The Jeep matched the vehicle seen near the home. Its data placed it near the scene during the key time window. And then, one day after Kaitlin was questioned by police, she sold it. Then we get to the forensic evidence, and this is where the gun and the bike become really important. At the scene, police found 3 shell casings. The gun itself was not there, but later, during the search of the home Colin and Kaitlin shared, police found 2 handguns. One was Colin's gun, the other was 6 Sauer P365 9mm connected to Kaitlin. A firearms expert compared the evidence from the crime scene to those guns, and according to the expert, the gun connected to Kaitlin matched the shooting. Colin's gun was not a match. Now, the defense pushed back on this. They argued the ballistics can be subjective because an expert is comparing tiny marks and patterns, so they wanted the jury to question how certain that match really was. But for the prosecution, this was a major piece of evidence. The gun connected to Kaitlin was, according to the expert, the gun connected to the murder scene. Then there was the DNA. Moriah's bike, the one found dumped in the bushes near the apartment, was tested. And according to trial reporting, Kaitlin's DNA was found on parts of that bike, including areas like the handlebars and the seat. Moriah's DNA was also on the bike, which makes sense because it was her bike. There was also DNA discussed on the gun. Based on the available case summaries, DNA connected to Kaitlin and Colin was found on the weapon. That part is not shocking by itself because the gun was connected to their home and Colin had bought it for Kaitlin, but it still mattered as part of the larger picture. The defense tried to challenge the DNA evidence too. They argued the DNA can transfer in ways that are not obvious. And that is true. DNA is not always as simple as you touched it, so you did this. It can move from one object to another. It can transfer through shared spaces, shared items, clothing, bags, cars, or other objects. The DNA expert also could not say exactly how Kaitlin's DNA got onto the bike. She could identify DNA, but she could not fully explain the exact action that put it there. The defense also pointed out there was unknown DNA, and they questioned parts of the testing. They also argued that the Jeep was not tested in the way they thought it should have been, but the prosecution saw the bike differently. Their point was that Moriah's bike had been inside the apartment before the murder, and after the murder it was found outside, dumped in bushes near the area where the Jeep had been. So if Kaitlin's DNA was on the bike, that mattered, because someone moved that bike after Moriah was shot. And that is really how the whole trial worked. The defense tried to pull each piece apart. The DNA has questions, the Jeep only shows the car, the phone could have died, the ballistics expert should be wrong. But the prosecution kept saying, do not look at only one piece by itself, look at the whole picture. Colin was one of the most important witnesses in the trial because he was the person connecting Moriah and Kaitlin. So when he testified, the court went through a lot of uncomfortable history. He talked about his relationship with Kaitlin, how they met, how they lived together, how they broke up and got back together, and how their lives become tied together through the house, the business, and money. Then he talked about Moriah. He explained how they met through cycling, how they become close, and how they spent time together in Marfa after he and Kaitlin had broken up. He also said that after that short romantic period with Moriah, he got back together with Kaitlin. but he did not fully cut off contact with Moriah, and it is where some of the most awkward details came out. Colin admitted that he saved Moriah in his phone under the fake name Christine Wall. He admitted that he deleted messages. He said he did that because he did not want to upset Kaitlin. He also talked about how Moriah's contact had somehow been blocked in his phone, and he said he was not the one who blocked her. Then he had to talk about the night of May 11th. He admitted that he picked Moriah up, went swimming with her, went to dinner with her, dropped her off, and then lied to Kaitlin about where he had been. He did not tell Kaitlin she had spent the evening with Moriah. And this is where Colin's role gets complicated, because legally he was not charged. The prosecution did not say he killed Moriah. The data placed him away from the crime scene when the shooting happened. There was also a phone call around 9:07 p.m. that lasted 8 minutes and 58 seconds, which covered the time when the scream and gunshots were recorded around 9:15. So the prosecution rejected the idea that Colin was the shooter. But morally, emotionally, whatever you want to call it, his role is uncomfortable, because his choices created so much confusion. He did things, he lied, he changed Moriah's name in his phone, he deleted messages, he tried to keep the worlds from crashing into each other, and then they crashed in the worst possible way. And I want to be clear, being emotionally messy is not the same as murder. Lying to your girlfriend is not the same as pulling a trigger. Colin was not convicted of killing Moriah, but it is hard to look at this case and not think that his secrecy helped build the pressure around it. And that is the most uncomfortable part of Colin's role. Legally, he was not the person who pulled the trigger, but without his lies and secrets, this story would look very different. By the time the trial reached closing arguments, both sides were really asking the jury to look at the case in two totally different ways. The prosecution's message was basically, look at a pattern. Kaitlin had a motive. She knew who Moriah was. She had been upset about her for a month. She had looked at her online. Her Jeep was near the house at the time Moriah was killed. Her phone was offline during the most important part of the night. The gun connected to her matched the shooting, according to their experts. Her DNA was on Moriah's bike. And after all of that, she sold the Jeep, left Texas, used someone else's passport, went to Costa Rica, changed her look, used fake names, and later even tried to run from custody. So the prosecution was not asking the jury to believe one perfect piece of evidence, they were asking them to look at everything together. The defense saw it completely different. They kept coming back to the gaps. There was no video from inside the apartment. No eyewitness saw Kaitlin shoot Moriah. The GPS data showed where the Jeep was, but not who was driving it. The DNA, according to the defense, could have another explanation. Ballistics could be questioned. And they argued that police focused on Kaitlin too early, then started reading every piece of evidence through that one idea. So for the jury, the question was very simple, but also very heavy. Were these pieces enough? Not one piece, all of them together. And on November 16th, 2023, the jury came back. Guilty.
The defendant will please rise. In cause number D1DC 22301-129, State of Texas versus Kaitlin Armstrong, verdict of the jury. We, the jury, find the defendant, Kaitlin Armstrong, guilty of the offense of murder as alleged in the indictment, signed by the presiding juror on today's date, 2:14 p.m.
Kaitlin Armstrong was found guilty of murder, and the jury did not take days to decide. They deliberated for less than 3 hours. So in the end, the jury did not need video from inside the apartment. They believed the puzzle was enough. The next day, November 17th, 2023, came the sentencing. Kaitlin Armstrong was sentenced to 90 years in prison. She was also given a $10,000 fine. So legally, that was the number the court gave her. 90 years. Basically, the kind of sentence where even if parole becomes possible after decades, this is still a life-changing punishment. Under Texas parole rules for murder, she could become eligible for parole after 30 years of actual time served. But that does not mean she will be released after 30 years. It only means the parole board can review the case. They can still deny it. But the sentencing was not only about the number of years. This was also when Moriah's family got to speak. And this is always one of the hardest parts of a case like this, because during the trial, so much becomes technical: phone data, GPS, DNA, ballistics, timelines. But then the family speaks and suddenly you are reminded that this was not just a case. This was their daughter, their sister, their friend. Moriah's mother, Karen Wilson, spoke directly to Kaitlin, and one of the most painful things she said was that when Kaitlin shot Mo in the heart, she also shot Karen in the heart, and everyone who loved Mo.
When you shot Moriah in the heart, you shot in my heart.
That line is so simple, but it says exactly what murder does. It damages every life around that person. Moriah's father, Eric, also spoke about losing his daughter, and her brother Matthew talked about what Moriah meant to him. He found out she had been killed on the day of his graduation from the University of Colorado Boulder, so a day that should have been one of the happiest days of his life became the day his whole family changed forever. Kaitlin Cash also spoke about what happened to her after finding Moriah, because she was the person who came home and found her friend on the bathroom floor. She talked about trauma, PTSD, panic, guilt and fear, and honestly, how could someone not carry that? She had opened her home to her friend, and then her home became the place where her friend was killed. During much of the trial, people noticed that Kaitlin did not show much emotion. She often sat there with a very still expression. But I want to be careful with that, because someone's face in court is not evidence. People react differently under stress. Some freeze, some shut down, some are probably told by lawyers not to react, so I would not use her expression as proof of guilt. The evidence is what convicted her. At the end, the sentence was 90 years, but for the Wilson family, no number could bring Moriah back. After the criminal trial, there was also a civil case. On June 17, 2024, a Travis County judge ordered Kaitlin Armstrong to pay Moriah Wilson's parents $15 million. It was a wrongful death lawsuit, and from what was reported, Kaitlin didn't show up to the hearing and did not respond to the lawsuit, so the judge entered a default judgment against her. Now, of course, when people hear $50 million, it sounds huge. And legally, yes, it is huge, but realistically, that does not mean the Wilson family will actually see that money. Kaitlin is in prison. It is not clear what assets she has or whether she could ever pay that amount. So this was more about legal responsibility than some kind of real financial repair, because no amount of money could fix what happened anyway. Kaitlin also appealed her conviction. She did not suddenly admit guilt after the trial. She continued to fight the case. Her appeal raised several issues, including questions about her police interview, whether she should have gotten a new trial, and arguments around evidence like DNA and expert testimony. Her lawyers also brought up a possible pregnancy, but that part has to be handled very carefully. The pregnancy claim came from the defense side. It was not some clear finding from investigators that explains the murder, and we do not know exactly when she would have known about it if it was true. Before the murder, after the murder, during the escape, that has not been clearly explained in the public record, so I would not use it as a motive, and I definitely would not present it like a confirmed reason for anything. At most, it is something her defense tried to bring into the conversation later. Then in January 2026, the appeal decision came out. The Texas Third Court of Appeals upheld the conviction. They also upheld the 90 years sentence. So legally, the case became much clearer. Kaitlin had been convicted, sentenced, and then the higher court agreed that the conviction should stand. But even with the legal ending, there are still parts of the case that people argue about, because some details still feel uncomfortable. The case had no video from inside the apartment. No eyewitnesses saw the shooting. Some of the evidence had limits, and that is exactly why people still talk about it. After the trial and the appeal, the legal part of the case became much more settled, but the people connected to it did not just go back to normal life, because there really is no normal life after something like this. Moriah's family started the Moriah Wilson Foundation. The goal is to support young athletes, especially women, in cycling and to keep going with the things Moriah cared about. Sport, community, helping people feel welcome, helping young women have more space in cycling. And I think that matters because her family has always tried to remind people that Moriah was not just the person at the center of the murder case. She was more. She was their daughter, their sister, their friend. She had values, she had plans, she wanted to build something. Her family still has to live with the loss, obviously. They speak about her drive, her kindness, her love for sport, her future. And that is so important because in cases like this, the crime can become bigger than the person. The details get so shocking that people start talking more about the killer, the escape, the trial, and the weird twists than about the person who was actually lost. Colin Strickland was never charged in Moriah's murder. Legally, he was a witness, not the accused. But his life changed too. His name was tied to the case forever. Some of his sponsors ended their relationship with him, including Specialized and other brands. He stepped back from professional racing and later he moved more into restoring and renovating cars and travel trailers. So even though he was not convicted of anything, the case still followed him. And I think that makes sense in a way because his choices were a huge part of the story. Not legally the same as murder, no, but emotionally he was right in the middle of the mess. Kaitlin Armstrong was sentenced to 90 years in prison. She has continued to deny guilt, but her appeal did not work. The conviction stayed in place. So for her, this case ended with prison. For the court, it ended with a sentence. But for people who loved Moriah, it does not really end. It just becomes something they have to carry. And this case is still one of the most talked about true crime stories from the cycling world. So when I think about this case, I always come back to the same thing. Moriah was supposed to race that weekend. That is why she was in Austin. She was not there for drama, to be pulled into someone else's relationship chaos. She was there because she was building a career she had worked so hard for. She had a future, she had a dream, she had a family who loved her. She had friends, a whole community around her, and she was just starting this new chapter where she had left her job and was trying to become a full-time professional cyclist. And then all of that was taken from her. When people hear the Moriah Wilson case, a lot of them remember Kaitlin Armstrong first. They remember the escape to Costa Rica, the fake passport, the nose surgery, the fake names, and that wild yoga job ad. And I get it, those details are almost unbelievable. But Moriah was not a side character in Kaitlin's story. She was a young woman who was just starting to live the life she had fought for. And I think that is what makes this case feel so sad and so frustrating, because so much of it feels like it came from things that should have been handled with honesty. Conversations, boundaries, truth, walking away. anything but violence. Moriah should have had that race weekend. She should have had more races after that, more wins, more losses too, because that is life, more boring normal days that nobody writes true crime scripts about. And instead, her name became part of the case file. And I want to know what you think. Do you think the jury would have decided the same way without the evidence of the escape to Costa Rica? Or which piece of evidence feels the strongest to you? The jeep, the gun, the DNA, the digital trail, or the escape itself? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more deep true crime stories like this, please like the video, subscribe, and let me know which case you want me to cover next.